Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. I hope that you're having a wonderful day. If you're new here, my name is Neve and it would mean the world to me if you would stick around. Before I get into today's video, I just want to apologise for my absence the past couple of weeks. I'm still not quite there on being able to get like a work filming balance. I don't have a proper excuse, I just haven't quite figured out how to work it into my schedule yet. Just because it takes me quite a long time to travel to work, so I've still not got the hang of accounting for that in the time of my day that I'll have missing. But hopefully I'll get myself sorted and won't be missing 3 weeks between videos as often in the future. Anyway, today's video is sort of double purposed. It is going to be a review video of a book, but it's also going to be my October wrap up because this book is the only book that I read in October. The book that I will be reviewing for this video is Aristotle and Dante Dive into the Waters of the World, which, if you don't know, is the highly anticipated sequel of Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe by Benjamin O'Leary Sains. I always Google it and then I always say it wrong. Which again, if you didn't know, if you're new here, this is my favourite book. It's been my favourite book since I was like 13. I am now 18. It's been a long time. And I'm very excited to discuss the sequel with you. So, quick recap on the first book before we move into the sequel and what I thought of it. Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe follows the protagonist Ari, who is just really struggling. He doesn't really have the words to explain how he feels, and at that point in his life, the book starts when he's 15. I think even if he did have the words, he would be unwilling to use them. He feels isolated from himself and his family, and he's just not having a very good time, and he meets this boy called Dante and they become fast friends and take on the many a challenge of growing up together and the many tragedies of life together. It is an absolutely beautiful coming of age story. One of my favourite things about this book is the author's writing style, but even beyond that, the characters are so realistic and so well built, and just you can tell it's just been crafted with the utmost love and care, which makes it so easy to grow attached and fall in love with them. So when I heard that there was a sequel coming, I was obviously very excited. I waited, I think it's been about 1.5 years since the sequel was officially announced with its title, because it's been, I think, 10 years since the first book came out. So we've been waiting for the sequel for a while. And here it is. This came out in the middle of October. I think it was the 12th or the 14th, I can't remember exactly. And as you can see, it is a much bigger book than Aristotle and Dante #1 was. This is a hard comparison to show you because this is the American copy of the first book and this is the UK copy of the second one. So it is like not as tall, but as you can see, there's quite a difference in size. I think Aristotle and Dante was like 350 pages long and the sequel is about 550, so there's quite a big difference. It is a longer book. I think that might put some people off, but I was just too excited about the prospect of having a sequel to be bothered that it was longer. I also don't mind a bigger book, so that was not a yes or no factor for me, although I know that some people find it quite difficult to get through longer books, so bear that in mind, I guess. Now, the sequel starts off like immediately from where the first book ends. I'm trying to be as spoiler free as possible because I don't want to ruin it if you've not read the first one, but this book starts off pretty much immediately after the first book ends and follows the next like year or so of the characters' lives. That was something that I found interesting about this book, is it is a much larger book but it spans a much shorter amount of time. Aristotle and Dante, the first book, spans about 2.5 years of the characters' lives. This book, I think, spans basically summer to summer, so there's that. But I think for this book and the topics that it handles, that shorter time frame actually works really well, because you get to spend a little bit more time really getting to know how the characters feel about what's going on, and you get to learn about the feelings of like maybe more characters than you would if they were having to do each moment shorter, because there was more moments, if that makes sense. Another thing I think that makes this spanning less time work is that this book spans Ari and Dante's senior year in high school, so they're like 17, turning 18, and they're faced with the sort of issues of what growing into manhood really means from a societal standpoint, whether or not they're going to go to college, are they going to go to the same college, what insecurities that might bring to their friendship, their relationship. So I think that it works spending more time on each moment of this book instead of having it span like a couple of years. I thought that was interesting. I thought it was done well. Hello, it's Editing Neve here. I just wanted to add that the reason I think that them being able to spend more time on each moment works so well as well, and like I said before, the fact that you get to sort of see more than just Ari react to the situations. The reason I think that that works so well in this book is that a lot of this book is Ari learning how to accept love and let people in and form connections with more than just Dante, and also like work on the connection that he already has with Dante. So I think being able to dive a little bit deeper into some of the other characters in the novel in addition to Aristotle is a really important part of this sequel. And so I think that being able to spend more time on the moments, because the book spans a slightly shorter amount of time, works really well for exploring these relationships, which are such a key part of this sequel. As you can see, I did enjoy this book. You can see my tabs. I will say overall, before I get into some of my favourite moments and etc, I think that I preferred the first book to the sequel. But I don't know if that for me is just because of how long I've loved the first book and the impact it had on me getting to meet these characters and fall in love with them for the first time. So I'm not necessarily saying I think the first book is a better book. I just think if I was going to have a preference, it would be the first book. But I did, as a blanket statement, absolutely adore this book with my entire heart, and I think that it is the perfect sequel to the first one. I think it is about almost, if not everything that we could have asked for and that the author could have given us without it feeling like he was glossing over problems to give us like a nice little sequel, if that makes sense. And I think to have asked for more would be asking for too much, I think, maybe. However, there are some things I liked about this book more than others, and we'll get into it. As I've said before, one of the best things about this author's work and the first book, and what made me fall in love with it as much as I did, is the author's writing style and some of the quotations that you find from the book. As you can tell, there are many of them in the first one. So I'm going to read you some of my favourite quotes from the sequel, trying as much as I can to avoid spoiling anything for you, so I'll leave out some of the ones that maybe give major plot points away. On one of the first pages we have love took you out of exile and carried you to a country called belonging. There's a sort of like running metaphor or like just running theme in this second book that references cartography and maps and sort of comparing relationships and the world to places and countries and kingdoms, etc. And I think that that quote I've just read you on one of the first page sets that up really well. Aristotle makes a lot of references throughout the book to how he feels like in order to feel like he exists comfortably in the world, that he would have to create his own world and write his own map for it. And sort of uses that allegory where in regards to his relationships and letting people in, and using like words to do with like opening up borders and giving people permits to come in to visit your country, and things like that. It's sort of like a running imagery throughout this book, and I think that being there from the beginning sets that up really nicely, and it continues pretty constantly throughout the novel. So there's that. One of the other kind of big themes of this book is sort of humanity and good and bad and hatred and tolerance, and how that actually functions in the world when you add people into the theory, if that makes sense. And one of the quotes regarding that just says, "When will we all get to be human, Dante?" And in reference to the kind of context of it and just in general, that was quite moving for me, more than you would expect it to be. But I think it's true. We hold ourselves and other people to unachievable standards on one side of it, and on the other side I think that there are many people and there's behaviour and actions that we see every day that are so bad that it's very hard to accept that it is a person doing that, and that those behaviours feel and appear to be, and in many senses almost are, less than human, and it seems impossible to meet a middle ground. That is another sort of like running like question throughout the novel, and I think that quote in general sums up that ongoing conversation throughout the novel pretty well, even if it happens, you know, it's made quite early on in the novel. There's a lot of quotes in this book that are almost like direct references to some really moving moments in the first book, and I quite liked how he returned to them, sometimes with some sort of resolution, and it's almost like a cathartic reference back to the original because things have improved, and sometimes it just felt like the question or the statement or the feeling was being repeated because they were maybe things that we haven't been able to find a resolution to, questions that Ari was still asking, struggles he was still having. But I think that did a really, really exceptional job of tying the two books together even more than they already were, because you recognised those moments and you remembered the impact that those quotes had on you the first time, so getting to hear them again in a slightly different context when Ari's in a slightly different place in his life was really interesting to me, and I really enjoyed that. One of the big ones is in the first book. There's a quote that is something along the lines of, "I wonder if you could find all the secrets of the universe in someone's hand," and the quote is repeated here that says, "Sometimes you did discover all the secrets of the universe in someone else's hand, and sometimes that hand belonged to your father," which is a really important moment in this book because Ari's relationship with his father is a very key point of both the first novel and this novel. So it was nice to see that quote come back and be compared to a different relationship than I think you expect it to be. I think that you expect if it's going to be repeated, it's going to be repeated about Dante, and for it to not be, for it to be about a different relationship, I thought was really clever, and I enjoyed it, and I think it made the use of it almost more meaningful because it was like so purposeful, and I think it fit really well in the moment that they put it in, especially considering the plot of the novel previous to that and then what happens after it. I feel like it was a perfect point for it to be in the novel. So I really just appreciate how clear it is that the author of these books cares so much about them and cared about making a faithful sequel, and a sequel that had a point and added to the first book and was not just a sequel for the sake of a sequel, if that makes sense. And I really think that he did do that, and I'm very grateful for that, because I do think it would have broken my heart a little bit if I'd read this book and it had felt forced somehow, or pointless, if that makes sense, but it didn't, so that's always good. The other thing I will say about this book is it is, I think, somewhat lighter in tone to the first one, although not necessarily by much, or the plot isn't necessarily happier, but I think the difference in this book to the first one is a lot of Ari's struggle in the first book is very internalized, and it affects his external relationships, but he struggles very silently, and he struggles by himself, and he doesn't know how to reach out, and he feels very isolated. So I think as a general tone, the first book is a lot more like melancholy, and it's tenser because it's from Ari's perspective, so we're just seeing all of this like internalized pain. Whereas the second book, Ari has got a bit more of a community behind him, and he's learning to open up, and he's learning to communicate, and his family are learning to communicate with him. So when bad things happen, which they do because that's how life is, it's almost more manageable because we're not getting this monologue of like really severely internalized pain. He's learning how to accept help, and he's learning how to use the words that he has to express what's in his head, which is a big change to the first book. It's a good change, and it definitely has an impact on the tone of this novel in comparison to the last one. He still has the same sort of slightly self-deprecating, snarky humor in the first book. Him as a character and his like core personality hasn't changed, but we just get to see him really build on and work through some of the issues that were presented in the first book, which I think is like all you can really ask for in terms of development for his character and for the sequel in general. So I was quite happy about that, but definitely I think was a bit shocking because I was almost expecting it somehow to be equally as sad, which I'm glad it isn't. However, warning, as in the first book, if you've read the first book, you know there are two moments of like just complete and utter tragedy in this book that really test the characters and their relationships and everything else, but they're heartbreaking. This book has its own tragedy, and it does warn you that there's a tragedy coming in the book, so in the blurb, so you almost expect something bad the whole book, and let me tell you, it is something bad and it is sad. I will, if I can find it, I will put a picture in of me when I got to that part of the book because it's a very funny picture. I cried and cried and cried, and it was the type of crying where like you're crying so hard that there's no noise. It's just silent, like screaming. That was me. So prepare yourself for that. But I do think overall the writing style is just as beautiful. There are so many just like wonderful quotes. I think if you can see, like, this book has been annotated, not quite to the extent as I've annotated this one, but this is like 3 or 4 reads worth of annotations, so there is obviously that to take into consideration. But I absolutely think if you're a fan of the first book that this is 100% non-questionably worth reading. I think it's a brilliant sequel. I adored it. I will definitely be rereading it. I'm going to give myself a little bit of a break, read something else, prepare myself, and then come back to it and read it again, because I'll have missed things in my haste to just devour it and be back in this world with these characters. So I'd like to give it another go and take my time slightly. So I'm so excited to come back to this book and read it again, and hopefully I'll love it even more the second time. I think to end this video I would like to read you some of the little annotations that I've made, because I was saying something, not something helpful or clever, but there's a lot of just me being like asterisk screams. Or I'm looking for one in particular. and I don't know if I'm going to find it. I've just made one that I was like, I love him and I'm so proud of him and he feels so real to me. And I think that's one of the real big selling points of this book, or like just what makes it so wonderful and what I think has given it such a like dedicated audience, is these characters really do feel like people, and they feel like people that you know and people that you love, because you just fall head over heels in love with them. In particular, the protagonist, who doesn't think anybody loves him, at least not in the first book, and it just makes you so invested. And a lot of my like pencil annotations of these books are just me being so invested in these characters as people, instead of just as characters that I'm reading about. And I think that that is a subtle but very important difference as to why these books are as impactful as they are, and why I personally love them quite as strongly as I do. But yeah, I've read you my silly annotations, I've given you my silly little thoughts about these wonderful books, in particular the sequel. So if you haven't read either of these books before, I'm telling you right now, if you take any recommendation from me, it is to give them a go, and I hope that you love them as much as I do. If you've read the sequel already, please let me know what you thought in the comments. If you haven't read the sequel but you've read the first one, then feel free to let me know what you thought about that one too. Always love to hear about these books. I hope that you enjoyed today's video. If you did, give it a like, leave a comment. If you haven't already, it would mean the world to me if you would subscribe, and I'll see you next week.